Tonight we are heading out on a quest. Not just any quest, a cryptid quest. Yes, we are going in search of Bigfoot. We are going in search of the Yowie. We're going in search of the Dogman and much, much more. And to lead us on this journey, we have a very special guest. Patrick Perry is the host of the podcast, The Cryptid Quest, and he will be right with us after this. Patrick Perry, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. Thank you for putting up with my nonsense and having me on here.
Oh, it sounds like you've had a bit of a hectic few days, so hopefully things are going to get back to normal.
Yeah, it'd be nice. I didn't want to let you down, though, so here I am.
We are all good, my friend. We are all good. So I just thought I'd start off. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you first got interested in Cryptid Quest is your podcast, and obviously you had an interest in it before that. What sparked your interest in the cryptids?
Honestly, I've always been interested since I was a kid. Of course, everybody that has seen all the old shows with the Patty and that kind of sparked my attention. So I'd go to the library and look at books, and any book about Bigfoot. If Bigfoot's the one who got me really into it. Try to look in the books and see if there was anything around my area. And of course, they have Momo. That's the Missouri. I'm from Missouri, by the way, down by Branson. But the Patty film had Patty up in Washington State. And, you know, I'm like, so my whole life I'm thinking there's really not any Bigfoot around here, even though it piqued my interest. I liked watching the shows, but I never went investigating, never worried about it. And then one day back in 2016, I was deer hunting. It was bow season here in Missouri, and my sister had some property down by the Merrimack River, and I was a carpenter at the time, and I'd just gotten laid off, and so I had a little bit of time in between jobs. So I just went out, hung out at her house, and I'm like, hey, bow season just opened. You mind if I do some hunting? She's like, no, go ahead. So I set up a deer blind out in the field, and also there was a cave I used to like to go and explore. It was right off the Merrimack River. And one day I went down to the cave, kind of milled around and just had a good afternoon. I walked from the cave, and I had a ground blind, and the entire ground blind was enclosed besides a little hole about that big that I could see the field through, and enough to where I could launch an arrow. I was using a crossbow, not a compound. So, and I decided to go out, and I had noticed one day that the deer, and I was seeing them every day. I was seeing deer every day, and then all of a sudden, they disappeared. I'm like, what happened to all the deer? And this went on for about 2 or 3 days where I didn't see a sign of anything. And so I asked her if she minded if I said, I wonder if the bucks went into rut early and they're chasing the does around so much that they're just coming out at night. Just something was weird. And I was like, I'm just going to go sit in the deer blind, do my evening hunt. Then I'm going to stay in the deer blind overnight and see what I can see. And then I'll wake up in the morning and I'll do my morning hunt. And she said, that's fine. So I go to the blind, and it was a strange day because they always say the forest goes quiet. Well, it really did. I wasn't hearing birds. I wasn't hearing squirrels. I just didn't hear anything. And, and I sat there, didn't see anything, and I got cozied up. It was probably around 8 o'clock. I probably fell asleep. I had a blanket in. I was planning on spending the night in the blind. So I had a blanket and everything with me, and I fell sound asleep. And I still remember it was 2 a.m. in the morning. I hear something, loud. It woke me up, and I'm hard of hearing as it is. but it woke me up. And I'm like, what? And first thought, I mean, I was sound asleep. I had drool coming down my chin. I was dreaming. And I hear what sounds like a gorilla. It sounded like a gorilla. You know, waking me up out of a dead of sleep, that just, I don't know, it was boggling my mind. I'm like, what the hell am I hearing? You know, and I'm starting to wake up a little bit, and I'm sitting up, and I'm still in the blind. I can only see through that hole. You know, I can't really see anything around me. And I'm listening, and it's like, whoa. I mean, so loud that I could feel it in my body, and it sounded like it was right behind my blind. And I'm like, what the hell is that? I'm like, did a gorilla escape from the frickin' zoo or what? And I'm listening, and I can hear it breaking branches, moving through the leaves, and I'm in the corner of a field, so I'm pretty much surrounded by woods except for straight in front of me and a little bit to the left. Everything to the right behind me was all woods, and I could hear it moving behind me, and it's going to my right, and it starts going up, and I can hear it. It's making a ton of noise, and I'm sitting in my blind, and I'm like, how can nobody be hearing this and not waking up? Because I mean, there was houses that were probably, I don't know, quarter mile away from where I was, but it was so loud that I'm like, somebody has to be hearing this.
So you weren't really deep into the woods. You were just sort of on the outskirts, and it was that close.
Yeah. So basically, where I was, there was a lot of houses up, like to the left, but everything to the right and in front of me was all woods, straight down to the river. Nothing but woods. So, and that's where it was. And then it started going up. Then it started doing the howl. It started going, I mean, really loud. And now I'm confused. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, sounded like a gorilla. Now it sounds like a damn howler monkey. I'm like, what in the hell is going on? And then I started getting a little worried. And now I'm sitting up in my chair, and I'm holding my crossbow to my chest, and I can hear it coming back again. And then it gets behind me again. And then it started doing what at that point in time I called demonic chatter. They now I think they call it, well, I know they call it samurai chatter. It was going, and Ron Moorhead's tapes are the ones that when I listened to them, I heard every sound that, you know, I heard that night. I heard on those tapes. And there's one to where I've been told that they were arguing over food, but they're going like, and I don't know if it was more than one. I could, you know, in my mind it was only one, but it was doing that. And when it started doing that, I got really, really scared because I really didn't know what I was up against. And I'd never heard of Bigfoot making that sound before.
Did it actually come across your mind at the time that it might have been a Bigfoot, or you just had no idea what you were experiencing?
At that point in time, I did not have a clue. Honestly, Bigfoot was not in my mind at all. Even though I was very interested in Bigfoot, was not in my mind at all. I didn't think for the least bit that they were in the woods of Missouri. Didn't think about it. So, and when it started doing that, I sat up and I grabbed my crossbow and I'm holding it to my chest, and I started praying Hail Marys, because as it was doing that, it started going back around. And when I say it, when it was on the right hand side, if it had come out of that wood line, I'd have saw it in the field. And I actually started praying to God that I don't want to see what's making this sound, because then I have to make a choice of what I'm going to do. And so, and I sat there, and it went on for a while. It might not even have been a 10-minute episode, you know, from beginning to end, but it felt like it was hours. And it finally, I could hear it meandering off back towards the river. And I was like, oh my goodness. So then I kind of relaxed and I fell asleep again, which people are like, how could you fall asleep again? Like,
that's impressive.
Yeah, well, I mean, after it left, I'm like, well, I'm stuck here till morning. It's 2 a.m., you know, So and it was probably, I'm sure it took me a good while to fall back asleep, but I did fall back asleep. And I remember it was 4 a.m. when I heard it again, but this time it was off in the distance. I could tell it was a bit away, and it was doing the howl again. The whoo! I could hear it, and it woke me up. And I got worried again. And then I'm like, okay, well, it's a little ways away now, so I'm just waiting for daylight. I want to see daylight before I do anything. And I actually fell back asleep again. And maybe, I don't know, 15 minutes after I fell asleep, my alarm starts going off for me to get up for the morning hunt on my phone without me even, because I didn't think about, I'm going to stay out in the blind, but I still set my alarm to get up to watch for everything. But when that alarm went off, I was so frightened that it was going to hear my phone and find me that I didn't even think to shut the phone off, think to do anything, but I ripped the back of it off and took the battery out. I was that scared. So, and then when it got daylight, I went to my sister's house and I talked to her about it. And then she started letting me know that she's been hearing these things all her life out there. And I'm like, well, that would have been nice to know before I went into the woods. So, and then from there, it kind of rolled on. I started talking to people and hearing that other people had encounters in the area, have seen them. There's a lot of BFRO, actually, within a 5-mile radius of where that happened to me. There's quite a few BFRO encounters that they have online. But that got the ball rolling for me a little bit, and then I was interested. Then I started talking to people, and I was trying to get out there and investigate and try to see what's going on. And then the more I did that, I was like, well, because then I was listening to a lot of shows, and I'm like, man, I want to do that. I want to talk to people. So then when I started up my show, at first I wanted to do Bigfoot, but then I'm like, there's a lot of interesting things out there. So I kind of opened it up to just about anything anybody wants to talk about. So, and that's what got me going.
Wow, you answered my next question before I even got there.
I'm sorry.
No. Because I was going to say, how did you go from being out hunting and getting an interest to deciding, I want to do a show about this? And give everybody a shout out to your podcast, because we're all here to show a little love to each other, and Cryptid Quest is where you're at, isn't it?
Yeah. Actually, if they try to look it up, it's because of like licensing and everything else. It's the Cryptid Quest Podcast. Because when I picked Cryptid Quest, I didn't realize there was a couple other shows out there that had Cryptid Quest, but they're no longer in use. But just to keep it original in mind, I went with it's probably backwards, since I don't know how to work the camera. But
no, it came through the right way around.
So, then actually a guy I work with, my producer Dirty, who's had a tragedy tonight, he kept pounding me and saying, because turns out my wife went to high school with RPG, Ryan Paul Gillespie, who's pretty big in it, and then I started talking to people that were pretty big in it, and then he's like, dude, you just should start your own show. It's like, you like talking, you like the subject. And he went to school to be a producer, but now we're just, we do maintenance for freaking a big rental company, but so this is our outlet. And he's the one who kind of really got me into it, and I enjoy the heck out of it. People seem to be real nice, courteous, and so far I think I've only met like maybe one crazy person, but it's okay.
Give it time.
I wouldn't call him crazy to his face. I feel for the guy. He's a super cool guy. We're actually friends, and he came on my show and he talked about he's like the cop, and he's like, the cops arrested me at my house. I was out in my front yard in my underwear, and then after the show I'm like, dude, you don't want me to put this up, do you? And he's like, oh yeah. I'm like,
there you go.
Okay.
So after your initial hunting experience, how often do you actually get out there looking for our big hairy friend? That sounded wrong.
I really enjoy going, at least once or twice a month when I get the time. But the peak season that I love going around here, and it varies because summertime's cool except for the ticks, because I had a few episodes last summer with doing my little research and coming back home and having a million seed ticks on me, which I don't know if you guys have those in Australia or not, but
not so much.
Yeah, well, you're lucky, I guess. I don't know. I'd rather have the ticks than the snakes, though.
Well, we have them. We have plenty of them.
Yeah, and the big spiders. I'm out.
Yes, we have them too.
But I really enjoy going like October, November, in the fall, closer to like winter, but not dead of winter. I mean, dead of winter's great. If you get some snowfall, it makes it easier to find tracks. Because actually a neighbor down the road that I met about a year ago, he was on Expedition X, and he showed me a whole bunch of tracks that he had pictures of in his yard. But Expedition X were trying to say it was the Ozark Howler, which is another cryptid. Yep. Yeah, and we live in the Ozarks. So, but he kept saying, he was like, it's not an Ozark Howler. And he showed me a really cool picture that he got from his game cam. And it looked like a damn baboon looking in the woods, which I think they call them a dugway.
I've heard that as well, yeah.
Specific types, and they're not supposed to be very nice. So I'm not sure I'm happy about that running around in my backyard.
That was going to be another question of mine as well. You mentioned earlier about the BFRO. Now, I used to go reading that just about every lunchtime when I was at work, reading all the different reports in different locations. And you had your A-class vocalizations, your B-class, and all your different sightings and stuff. And I was intrigued back then. But one thing they didn't really cover so much is when you talk to your different guests and things like that, and from your own personal experience, do you find the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, several different other names wherever you're located, to be more of a passive, shy creature or a bit more aggressive, or is there a sort of a mix between the two?
I'm going to tell you, that's something I bring up with a lot of my guests. They tend to be a lot bigger, but more docile, nice, or calm up in the Pacific Northwest. Then once you start getting down here to like Florida, Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, then they seem to be a lot more aggressive. They're not as big usually. I mean, you still have your varied accounts to where you're going to have each size here and there. But around here, they just seem to be a lot more aggressive from the encounters I hear. And to me, that resonates because even though I didn't see it and I didn't get killed by it, that was an aggressive encounter. And actually, it was almost a year to the day after that. I was taking an ex of mine to the cave that I was telling you about. And she didn't believe me when I told her what happened to me. And we were sitting down by the cave, and it was getting about dark. And sun was going down. We're just sitting in front, watching the river. And then all of a sudden, we hear on the other side of the river, her eyes got about as big as saucer plates. And she looked at me and she said, "It does sound like a monkey." I said, "I told you." And I walked down the path a little bit, and this was probably stupid because I've heard of them doing it, but I didn't know what it meant. And I'm like, well, I got to do something because now I'm a little worried it's going to try and come over here and get us. And we're a long ways from the car and out in the open. There's a bluff behind us in the river. I mean, we got nowhere to go. So I walk a little ways down, and I grabbed a big log. It was half dead. And I smacked a tree with it, and I smacked it so hard that I heard birds like fly off after I did it. And I walked back to her, and she said, when you did that, she said, it sounded like a scared chimpanzee running up the hill. She said, I could hear it going through the leaves. And she said it was going like that. And I was like, and I didn't hear that. That was secondhand from her. So, but I mean, I totally believed her, which I probably shouldn't have since she didn't believe me in the first place.
Oh, wow. When you go out in the woods now, knowing what you know, are you always, this is a bit of a silly question because in Australia it's a bit different, but do you take some kind of a weapon as protection? Because for me, if you're going out looking for something that's that big and potentially aggressive, you don't go out there with a little penknife or a little stick. You want something a little bit more substantial with you.
Yeah, actually, I don't. And I probably should, because the night I was sitting in that blind with a crossbow and one arrow, that's why I didn't want to see what it was, because I knew that arrow wasn't going to do anything. But then again, if it wanted me, it could have had me. I mean, at the time, I thought I was safe in that blind, but thinking back on it, it knew I was there. I mean, it was circling me. It knew I was in that blind. And so, I mean, I go out there with the idea that it's not going to hurt me, but it might try to chase me off. I'd have to take an elephant gun if you know, honestly, I don't think there's there's very few guns that I think would take a creature this size down.
Yeah.
Generally, and I always tell people this as a joke, I take a machete. And I've been a carpenter most of my life. So I'm like, with a gun, I'm going to be shaking, and I'm probably going to miss every time. At least if I got a machete, I got one good blow. And if I hit something good enough in the right spot, and I've been swinging things all my life, I'm pretty good aim with a hammer. So at least if I'm going to die, it's going to die. But yeah, I probably should, but I don't, because I think I kind of put it in God's hands, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't think they're really, even though they are more aggressive here, I don't think they're out there to hurt us. I think when they get aggressive, they're just out there trying to get us out of their territory. Say, hey, get away.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about Bigfoot and stuff like that, obviously different parts of the world, they have their different names for it. Like, you know, you go through the Himalayas and you have the Yeti. You go down through China, you have the Yeren. Here in Australia, we have the Yowie.
The Yowie. Love the Yowie.
Now, there's an awesome site there called the Yowie Research website, and there's a lot of sightings on there. And the reason I asked about whether they're fairly aggressive or whether they're fairly tame over there is because over here, usually they're like what you're saying, they're like docile, shy, they'll stay out of the way, or they're just indifferent. If you come across one, they'll just keep walking, look at you, and look the other way. You're not a threat to them. But there is one location up in far north Queensland called Ormeau. And if you ever get a chance, I do recommend you go to this website, and then you can go by state, and then you can go by location. Read the ones in Ormeau, because there are several sightings there, and it is one of the most aggressive things I have ever heard of. And I was like, yeah, well, I've been to far north Queensland, so I'm not going there.
Yeah. Let's say, seems like most of the Yowie stories I hear or encounters, they seem to be pretty aggressive.
Well, I've heard different, but up there definitely. Now, this one particular story is about this guy who apparently he would sneak out of the house on the night time because he had a lady that he used to like making phone calls to, so he needed a bit of privacy for this phone call. And there was a park at the end of the street. It was like a newly developed area, so it was just off the edge of the wilderness kind of thing, and there was a bit of a park. So he would go down into the park, and if you could picture it like a horseshoe kind of thing, it was a clearing, and he was sort of in the horseshoe area, and it sort of comes in like that before it comes out towards where the street is. Now, he was right down for privacy in this horseshoe part, talking to this lady friend, when he actually started hearing something in the trees, and he said it was big. The stomping was big, and it came right to the edge of the tree line, but it never came all the way out at the start. But it was enough that you could see a silhouette moving, and he was gauging it off signposts. You know, we have little like don't litter signs and things like that. Mm-hmm. And he put this thing at 8 to 10 feet tall. And he said that the sheer width and everything of this creature, he goes, it was intimidating. And he said it was just there, and it was just this kind of thing on the edge. He goes, he felt threatened, So
Oh
what
my goodness.
happened was he was still talking, and he goes, I'm starting now to walk back towards the street. But as he was starting to walk towards the street, this thing was skirting around the edge, and it was walking with him.
Pacing him.
And as he started to go faster, this thing, he started boom, boom, and you could hear it, trees, branches, and everything starting to go. He ended up into a full run, and then he said this thing, it just went into action. He goes, this thing was smashing, bashing, grunting, growling, and he said, I am shit scared. And he ran and ran. He got through the opening part where it gets quite tight, because he was crapping himself that it was going to beat him there, because he said, when you look at it, I was in a straight line. He goes, this thing was skirting around the edge, so it was going 2 to 3 times as far as me, but it was keeping pace. He goes, he thought it was going to beat him to there, and he goes, he had no idea what was going to happen. Anyway, he got through, and no more than 4 or 5 seconds afterwards, he reckons it would have only been a few steps away from actually getting him, but for some reason it didn't want to come all the way out. It came out far enough that he heard it, and he heard this almighty growl, and he got to the streetlight before he goes, he wasn't stopping for anything. He got to the streetlight where he felt a bit safe. He was on tarmac. He looked back, and he goes, and this thing, he goes, it was about 2 steps out from the tree line. He goes, and it was bigger than he even imagined. It was massive, and it just, he said, if that thing had got to him, he goes, he would have been dead. And then it went back into the woods, and he said he never went out there again. So he learned his lesson there.
I don't blame him.
No,
well,
but where I'm going with this is there are several other reports in the same area, and there was one where these tradesmen, this was a daytime sighting, they were there with their trucks and they were doing something, and this thing came out at them, and it scared them off to the point they shot off in their trucks. So there are specific creatures, I guess, like humans, that some are super aggressive and then others that are a lot more passive. And I just wanted to get your idea of the kind of percentage over there. Is it more docile opposed to aggressive in America?
Yeah, and honestly, you're gonna get reports no matter what. You're gonna find some aggressive reports up north. You're gonna find some that aren't so aggressive down south, but the majority seem to be down the southern side, seem to be more aggressive. Up north they seem to be, but they seem to be a lot bigger too. They describe them kind of like yowie size, like 9-10 foot tall. Down here 6-7 foot, 8 foot, but they seem to be aggressive. Actually, one of them, not the sister house I stayed at, but another sister of mine actually saw one and didn't tell me until she heard about my encounter. And I was like, oh yeah. She's like, oh, I don't doubt it. She's like, I've seen one. I'm like, what do you mean you've seen one? She's like, oh, she's a lot older than me. She's probably like 15 years older than me. So she's like, she was a teenager. I was a kid, but they were out, and they were out smoking weed on a gravel road, and her and her boyfriend and another couple. And they said they were parked on this gravel road, and there was this farmer's field, and they're by the river, and they seem to follow the rivers around here. But they were sitting there, and they said a car was coming, and its headlights had shined across the field, and she was in the front seat with her boyfriend, and her friends were in the back. And they said when they saw it, it was heading towards them, and she's like hitting her boyfriend, saying, we need to get out of here. We need to get out of here. Because she said it was about 7-8 foot tall. She said its arms went down like past its knees. And it, really, the way she described it reminded me a lot of I don't know if you've seen the cover of Boggy Creek, the Boggy Creek movie. Yeah, that's how I envisioned it when she explained it. And she said it got within feet of their car. And they were trying to get, and they're on a gravel road, and they're just spinning. This thing's steadily coming at them fast. And she said, and I don't want to give the names out, and they probably won't see this podcast, but she said the guy in the back seat was crying. He came to tears. He was so scared. But I can't blame him, really.
No, I can't. And I when you said how close they got to the car, we've had a guest on here a couple of times. He's a friend of the podcast, and he is also he's a friend on Facebook and everything. We chat quite a bit. His name is Ray Doherty, and he is the Australian Yowie researcher. He has an entire site here on it, and he has photos that he doesn't share publicly, but he's actually shown us some of these, which are incredible. But there are plans later on. Now, in the first interview we had with him, if you want, I can actually put you in contact with him some point, because he might come on your show, and it's our biggest rating show, that episode with him, and over 5,000 views. And he was talking about, he was out there, he started out as a UFO researcher. So he would go out to these locations and they would be out looking for UFOs and things like that. And that's when he had his first encounter, which completely changed his life and his direction of research. And he was out there one night with his son, and he goes, they were in the absolute pitch black, and they had experienced something in the area. Now I can't remember he's about 6'2" or 6'3", something like that, and his son's about the same. And he said his son was saying to him, what are you doing, Dad? And he said, you stopped breathing down my neck. And he turned around and he goes, I'm over here. And apparently they both froze. This thing had come right up behind him, so as thing was breathing out, it was hitting the back of his neck. So I don't know I can't remember that particular story where it went from there, but it certainly freaked them out. How close these things, everybody talks about how elusive the Bigfoot is, or the Yowie, or wherever it is, wherever you are. But how close that they can get right up behind you and you not know anything. Yet other times you can hear them stomping around and things like that. So that to me is more of they know you're there. Yeah. I'm coming in to have a curious look. So they're sneaking in opposed to the usual just stomping around and stuff like that. That tells me there's a bit of intelligence there as well.
Yeah, they definitely have to have. I mean, I'm not going to say they're as smart as humans, but they're extremely more smart than humans in their environment, because we come into a box every day and we drive around on streets that we made. But they are the ultimate, I like to call them forest ninjas, because you're not going to know they're there unless they accidentally make a mistake and step out in our area, or they want you to know they're there. Then you're going to know.
Yeah. It's interesting. Now, while we are talking about cryptids, there are more to the cryptid genre than just Bigfoot.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever spoken to anybody who's had experiences with things such as the Michigan Dogman or things like that?
Oh, yeah. I've had, I think, 4 guests on so far on my show that have had an encounter with Dogman. Very scary. Bear, a buddy of mine, he was actually my first real interview. He came across one when he was hunting. Actually, it was 3 of them, and he was out hunting, and they came up on him. I mean, it wasn't a whole lot of dramatization to it, but he was just like, he saw them, they saw him, and he hightailed it. But other than Dogman, the one that really intrigued me was, a guy told me, Ryan Tremblay, I'm getting ready to have him back on. He ran into what he described as a hyena man.
Okay.
He was in the strangest of places too, Arizona. And he said he was at his buddy's house and he was out in the back, and he said he looked up the hill and he thought it was a large dog. And he said it was on all 4s and he was just looking at it. He said then it started like running towards him down the hill really fast. And he's like, what the hell? And then it came up on him and like stopped and stood up on 2 legs. And he said it had the head of a hyena, looked like a hyena. And he said it kind of looked at him, cocked its head, and perked its ears up kind of like a dog does. And he said then it just turned around and went back the other way. And I was like, I think I would have needed a whole new
job.
I'd have crapped my pants, my shirt, and everything else if that would have happened to me. Yeah. And then another story I'm working on which I can't wait to have these guys on. I've got them scheduled. They were out Bigfoot investigating, and they both witnessed it, and they seemed very, very credible. But they saw what they can only describe. They said it was a lion man, like it had a cat's face, which they said that first they thought it might have been a Bigfoot, and it was going through the trees. They saw the stripes on it, and then it kind of looked at them, and they said it. And I want to have them both on, because when you got two people that saw the same thing, it kind of makes it a little bit more credible.
Yeah.
But
I've heard about the cat people, but to me, the reports I've heard, they've always been sort of more based in the African countries rather than the Western sort of, the United States or other places like that. But I have heard of them in and around Africa. So it's interesting that they seem to be getting about.
Oh, actually, yeah, maybe I have. On Facebook, I think I saw a statue once, and I sent it to the guy. I'm like, hey, and another, I'm dying to talk to this lady, but you're going to think this is way off the charts. But said she saw a deer with a human head, like a white-tailed deer.
No, I'm not sure about the different types of deer, but
you're not.
I'm going with it. I know what a deer looks like.
Okay, but I was like, okay. So then I was doing the interview. I did a second interview with Old Bear, and I was asking him about it, and he just kind of chuckled, and he's like, funny you should ask me that. And I'm like, why? He's like, they were out Bigfoot investigating, and he said he didn't see it, but his buddy did. And Bear's been doing this for a long time. He said he came back, and his buddy was like ghost white, and it's like, we gotta leave. And he's like, why? What's up? What'd you see? What's going on? He's thinking maybe he saw a Bigfoot or something. He's like, if I tell you, you're gonna think I'm crazy, and I don't know that I want to tell you. He's like, come on, man. We've been friends for years. And he's like, what did you see? He said, I heard something in the woods. It came out, and it was a freaking deer, and it had a human head. It looked at me, and then it ran back into the woods. And Old Bear was like, at first he was like, I thought he was messing with me, but he's like, I've known this guy for years, and he's not a liar, and so I have to believe him. And I'm like, well, I get that, but that's the kind of, and when I say crazy, I don't mean crazy in the head. Crazy,
like crazy, I think crazy, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's things out there, I'm sure. I guess I should consider myself lucky that I just had a Bigfoot behind me screaming at me instead of something like that.
Well, you think you had a Bigfoot. You don't know what. You might have had a Dogman or anything
That's
big.
true. That's true. Because a lot of people are like, well, why didn't you record the sounds? Why didn't you look outside your blind? I'm like, I thought I was going to die. I'm like, I didn't want to see what it was.
Yeah, it's funny how a lot of people
last thing I was thinking about was grabbing my phone and recording it.
Yeah, it's like when you're facing something like that. People talk over here that if you look at the belly scales or the I don't know what you call them, but the underbelly scales of a snake, if it's one type, it's a venomous snake. If it's a slightly different type, it's a non-venomous snake. And everybody that I know is like, if I see a snake, I'm not checking its asshole to see if it's poisonous or not. I'm going in the other direction. So it's like what you would say, when you're faced with something like that, especially when it's woken you out of a sleep, your brain is not going, I'm going to record this. You're like trying to come to terms with what's going on. Yeah, it's really interesting that, I don't know, do you seem to think there's more reports happening currently than there have been in the past?
100%. They seem to be off the charts. And people don't seem to be as afraid to tell their stories now as they used to be. Encounters seem to be, and not just the big, honestly, it's all the other encounters that seem to be really ramping up. You brought up Dogman earlier. One of my favorites is a guy who he saw one when he was a kid. He ran into it in the it's not a great, I mean, it's kind of a creepy story, but he said he saw this thing on the other side of a fire ditch, and he said it looked like it was holding something in his hand. He said it looked like a large German Shepherd standing on its hind legs, and it had something white and red in its hands. And he said as he was checking it out, he realized it was half of a, I think it was a cat. And only half of it, though. And it was holding it in its clutches. I mean, you didn't hear about things like that, 10, 15 years ago. But you hear them a lot now. Honestly, when I talk to these people, they sound legit. I mean, honestly, you can tell when somebody's a little loopy and when somebody's being honest with you. I mean, for the most part. But there's so many encounters. If one encounter is true, that's all it takes.
Yeah. Now, with us talking about the Dogman and everything and these different stories, we actually did a show on the Michigan Dogman some time back, and that was a pretty high rating show as well, for us anyway. So there is an interest out there for that, but there was one particular story which the people involved, you would have to say, have a credible background. They were both paramedics, first responders in an ambulance. And when you're in a big city and you have a specific area that you have to locate yourselves, well, they were on the night shift and they were on the outskirts of wherever it was. I can't remember the details offhand, but they decided they went and bought themselves lunch, Subway or something like that, and they parked in this darkened car park on the edge of this forested area to eat their lunch. Now, remembering they were the night shift, so it was still the middle of the night. Now, as they were driving in, they noticed in the headlights, right on the extent of the headlights, this massive wolf-type creature. And they said they were just impressed at the size of this thing, and they were actually admiring it. And they were approaching it slowly from behind because they were in the safety of their van, the ambulance. But as they got closer, they said it was way too big to be a normal wolf. But then it just sort of looked back at them and stared at them. And they said that's when they stopped because there was an intent and there was an intelligence behind that look. And they couldn't work it out. And it walked a little bit further. And they just froze watching it disappearing. And it wasn't until then that they sort of looked in the side mirrors. Remember how high an ambulance, you're a fair way off the ground when you're in an ambulance. They were looking in the side mirrors and there were more coming down the sides. But these were big and these ones were black. But what freaked them out more than anything was one of them actually got up on two legs and put its claws around the back door to try and open the door, and it was actually trying to open the door, and they were like, no. Luckily it was all locked, and then it came past the window and this thing was head high and it was that close, and it just stared at him before they dropped down to all fours, and then they took off. And then the one that was in the front got up on two legs and ran up, and they jumped over this fence, and they all just took off. So it was like that one at the front was a decoy while the others snuck up behind it. And again, that is an intelligent, and I'll go into that story. So obviously, if you go back and look at that at some point, I'll send you the link for it. I've actually got the story in front of me, so there's a lot more detail. I may not have said it verbatim there, but that is the intent. And it was enough that one of these guys actually quit. And the other one said, I'm never working the night shift again, and I'm never working in that location ever again. And it wasn't until they bumped into each other years later that one of the guys got an even bigger story from the same night, because while they were looking one way, there was something else happening on the other side. So there was even more to it than what I just told you. And that's, I'll let you watch that video at some point. So what's scary is these things, I mean, paramedics, you would have to say there's an air of credibility about what they do, and to come up with something like that and potentially ruin their chances of employment beyond that point because people will say you're crazy, there's got to be something to it. And if these things are out there, what are you exposing yourself to every time you head out into the woods?
So when you talk about a credibility story, I've not interviewed this guy. I actually had a chance to go on a road trip with a buddy of mine to go interview him. He does Sasquatch Theory. It's another podcast. And he's a judge now. He was a lawyer and then a judge, but this happened to him when he was a teenager. And he was I think he was out running, just running. And it was a dog. He's like, this dog on two legs was in the corn. It was a cornfield. This happened up in Michigan. There was a cornfield, and it was keeping pace with them. And he said it was following him. And this guy's a judge, and it's like, I mean, it don't get a whole lot more credible than that, you know? So I get it. If people are not going to throw their lives away just over some BS story.
Yeah, so. That's exactly it. Exactly it. Because a judge has got even more to lose than a paramedic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You just can't say things like that. And what you were saying before about how there's more reports happening now, I don't know if it's becoming more mainstream and people are actually just reporting it, or if there is an increase in activity. It's a hard one to sort of pinpoint what it is. Now, we're going to have to go in a minute because we're just about out of time, but
okay,
there is so much more to cryptids. You know, we haven't even gone into lake monsters.
I know.
All these other things yet. I might actually have you back on. You might have to come back on, and we might have to do a part two.
I'm going to tell you about one thing that's really I've been getting a lot of stories about around here. Thunderbirds and pterodactyls.
Oh, I've got a story on that as well. Yeah, go on.
All right. Let's say that for another time. I'm just saying.
No. Come on, you've piqued my interest now. You can't just do that and leave me hanging. Come on.
Well, okay. Well, I'll tell you. Well, my buddy he's up in Washington State. He sent me a video of it, and he works for the Forest Service, and so he knows his birds and everything else. And he said this thing was the size, wingspan was as long as his pickup truck. And he just got a video of it flying around. But then another story I got happened at a cave in a lake around here, and there was some dead animal like behind a rock, and these people were having lunch or whatever and swimming and stuff, and they're watching like the vultures come down. You know, black vultures, turkey vultures around here, pretty decent sized birds. But they said then all of a sudden they all took off, and this thing come in. They said it was at least 4 or 5 times the size of one of those, and they said it had no tail, looked like it had bat wings, and then had the thing off the back of it said, you know, like a pterodactyl does, kind of like a cone or something. And I'm like, in middle of the day when it came in, like the premier predator and that happened in Missouri, and we don't have things like that around here. I mean we got birds, but not that big. So I don't know.
It's an interesting, when you brought that up, I go, oh, okay, yes, you've definitely got to come back on now. I'm a paranormal researcher. I've been researching the paranormal for over 40 years, and I'll do everything, whether it be Bigfoot, whether it be the Yowie, whether it's UFOs, hauntings, you name it, I'm into it. I'm not one of these people that pigeonholes themselves in one specific genre of it all. Now, I had a team member, and we used to go out to a place, I'm not going to name the location, but it's an old abandoned lunatic asylum, right? It is in the suburbs. It's not out in the hills. It's nothing like that. It's not far from a military base. And he was there this one night, and he'll still tell you the story now if he would come on, but I don't think he's going to come on there to talk about it. And they were out the front of this lunatic asylum, and there's a few trees around and stuff like that, and it's fairly raised up, and there's a bit of a view from behind. And then, so if you look behind you, there's a bit of a view that you can see lights and things like that. And then you turn around, and it's the ominous front to this particular lunatic asylum. And he said he heard something had swooped, and he said he had no idea what it was. He felt it. They actually felt the breeze from it, because there was about 3 or 4 of them there. And then they were all looking around, going, what the hell was that? And they just got a glimpse of a shadow in the sky, because it was nighttime. So he couldn't give you a specific size. He said it was massive, whatever it was. It wasn't really defined, but there was something dark against the night sky. And he goes, it was circling and it was doing all sorts. And he goes, it was freaking them out. And then another swoop happened, but this time that screech that you see, every dinosaur film where you see a pterodactyl come in and that screech it makes. But he said, that was the noise. He said, but it wasn't so much the noise, it was the force behind it. So when you think Bigfoot and they talk about the lung capacity because they've got such a big chest, it was the same kind of thing from this bird. Oh, that's what I'm going to call it, a bird. He said thunderbird, he said pterodactyl, there's a few different names he's used for it. But he said, not only could you see it, you could feel it. He goes, it made every hair on your arm stand up, every goosebump stand up. And it made you feel. He goes, they ran back to their cars. They weren't hanging around. And this thing turned around and it came and it did one more sweep before it took off. And this is when I say in the middle of suburbia, there's still trees around and things like that, but there's a military base and then there's the ocean. So I don't know where this thing has come from to be hanging around this particular spot, unless there's a hiding place somewhere. And that's what's interesting. And when you brought that up, it just reminded me of that particular story. So they do turn up in the weirdest places, because the biggest bird we have here is a pelican. And they've probably got a 5-6 foot wingspan. This thing, again, like you said, it's probably 5 or 6 times the size of that.
Wow.
So this thing was pretty big. Like I said, he couldn't give you a specific explanation or description of what it looked like, but he said that screech said thunderbird, it said pterodactyl, it said run.
Yeah.
And there are so many other things out there. Say my co-host couldn't make it for this show, unfortunately, because they were both tied up with other things. But next time we'll get you back on again, and I'll have them both on as well.
Perfect.
And then we'll have a four-way conversation.
I'll have my whole setup next time. I'll be ready.
Sounds good. That's good. Anyway, before we do go, do you want to give your podcast and any websites a plug for everybody?
Yeah, sure. Anybody out there that wants to check us out, we're on YouTube and Spotify. It has to be the Cryptid Quest The Cryptid Quest Podcast. If you want to send us an email with any stories or just to talk, say hey, it's the Cryptid Quest Podcast.com at Gmail or at gmail.com. Let me get it straight. All right. Hey, producer, can you cut that out and re-edit it? Okay. He's not here to do that for me today. So the Cryptid Quest Podcast at gmail.com. That's it. It's Cryptid Quest on Facebook. Send me a private message and I'll answer you back. And check us out on YouTube and Spotify. The Cryptid Quest Podcast. Keep it creepy is what we say.
Yeah, well, my thing now is don't forget to look up.
Yeah. Perfect.
Especially after the last story we were just talking about anyway. So
Yeah.
Yes. Patrick, my friend, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and I hope you will come back on again very soon.
Heck yeah. I owe you anyway.
Nah, we're all good, mate. We're all good. Anyway.
Hey, you're going to have to reciprocate, though.
What do you mean?
Reciprocate. You're going to have to come on mine, too.
Not a problem at all. All.
Perfect.
I'll just sit back and then you can ask the questions then.
Yeah. Then I get to ask some questions. I like it.
That's it. Okay, thank you for tuning in, everybody. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, and all those other things that we all talk about and ask. Until then, take it easy, peeps. Thanks, mate.
See ya, everybody.